Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Security, Intelligence and Terrorism series. Today we have Lt Gen Prakash Menon with us. He joined the Indian Army in 1972, has extensive operational experience in commanding counterinsurgency operation in Central, North and South Kashmir. He was a Major General Staff of the Army's Northern Command, responsible for operations in Jammu and Kashmir, and the Commandant of the National Defence College, New Delhi. After his time in 2011, he continued in government as the military advisor and secretary to Government of India, and from 2015 as the officer on special duty in National Security Council Secretariat. He's the director of the Strategic Studies Program at Takshashila Institution and author of a book that we're going to talk about today on nuclear strategies. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and being on the show.
Thank you so much.
So the first question is, this is a question that a lot of people have been asking when we posted about conventional war system and about the Indian Army, and the first episode that we talked about as well, the Indian Army with you. Is there going to be more war or less war, considering that nuclear weapons are there at the moment and they're deadly?
Okay, so the point is about more wars and less war actually is not the question to ask, because wars take different forms. The way that if you define war as abuse of organized violence for political purposes, then the way that violence is applied, and it can have a very wide spectrum of definition of what violence means. Say a bomb being dropped or a bullet being fired, is that also just the same or different from the fact that suppose I had a weapon which can influence your minds, and then I can turn it around towards a belief system which I want to, either can do it at the individual level or the collective level. Suppose I had that power, that would that also constitute violence in the way that we knew that war is what it is. But if you really look at it, and therefore we need an expanded definition of violence itself. Violence is not only physical. Violence has to be also even the physical one is meant for psychological effect. And therefore, the thing about violence is that it can psychologically affect in terms of its consequences to the victim. The larger effect has to be psychological. A country on whom violence is applied has to accept defeat, or has to accept the fact that we will fight it on, like the Taliban has done with the Americans. And finally, that's a psychological decision comes from the leadership's mind, whether we have lost, what should we do. So eventually it is played out in the psychological domain of leadership, what will they to do, whether Hitler wanted to fight on because he was of such a disposition, or with the Japanese because the leadership refused to go down till the time, I'm talking about the Second World War. So the point is that today you can apply violence in many different ways. And so war is not changing, warfare is changing. And there is a lot of difference between the two. War is the larger, it is what defines a relationships normally between nations and non-state actors, between non-state. It is a political relationship, what we just defined, war, when actually the use of violence and force is done against each other to achieve political objectives. And that, therefore, within that, how is that violence applied is what warfare is about. Warfare, therefore, is about the character of war. how is war conducted. And history is witnessed that human beings have been improving in very large measures of how this violence is to be effected. And the nuclear revolution or the nuclear weapons in 1945 actually was the turning point, which has made a lot of difference to how wars are conducted between nuclear powers. But that does not mean that there is no wars going to be between nuclear powers and non-nuclear powers, or between non-nuclear powers themselves, or between any power and any opposition. Of course, the numbers might be actually different from what we have witnessed till, let's say, the 19th century, but this is only 2020, remember, and it depends upon the scale at which you are comparing. And you can say that the 20th century was the bloodiest, but we have just entered the 21st century. We do not know what's the type of wars which we are going to fight, but they will be fought. We simply do not know who's going to fight them and so on. But one of the reasons why the big wars have not been fought is because of the fact that the big wars might call into question the presence of nuclear weapons. So although the rhetoric must be different, it's also the case that major powers have exercised extreme caution when applying force against each other. They have been fighting through proxies, which is what it is, and driven warfare actually to a much lower level. So at the advent of the nuclear weapons, when the nuclear weapons was exploded in 1945, Bernard Brodie, an American political scientist and strategist, and he said that now the only purpose for use of force can only be to keep the peace. It cannot be to win wars, because you cannot fight. Of course, he put it slightly differently. Because if you fight, then nuclear weapons can be used. If you use nuclear weapons, depending upon the scale, and even in the smaller scale, it can be an existential threat to mankind itself. It's humanity's threat. Even, let's say, maybe about 100 nuclear weapons between India and, let's say, China, or India and Pakistan can actually bring about a long-term climatic consequences, which can bring, there are now enough scientific studies to tell us that it can be the end of the world, because what will happen is that the entire global biosystem will be, and the environment will be affected. Agriculture, water, everything will be affected. And finally, it might just about mean the end of the world. So despite of all that, the fact is that in one way we can say that it has kept the peace among the big powers, but it has perhaps moved horizontally, and there are small wars of all scales being fought at any time all over the globe. Now, it depends upon how you want to define war. And the statistics, of course, if you compare as I said, the 20th and the 21st, it is no comparison. And I must also forget that the type of statistics we're using is about death and so on. They're also highly, very controversial and this thing. So the question really is that it has brought peace among the big guys. But the danger of the big guys getting involved with the smaller guys and eventually getting involved in themselves is where humanity itself is threatened.
Yeah. So, sir, my next question is a little taking you back to your days and asking you, so how did you start researching on the topic? You're in the army, and then you started to research about the topic. I think you were in the tenure when India became a nuclear state. So,
Yeah.
did that influence you in any ways to start researching on the topic?
Oh, yes, actually, it came out from an incident. I was an instructor in this Defense Services Staff College in Wellington when India went nuclear in 1998. And we have a tradition there that whenever we have a lot of guest speakers come to the staff college because they speak to a very large audience. And there was a very distinguished senior military army officer, Lieutenant General, who had come to speak to the staff college. And the tradition there is that after there, he spent some time with in the conference room with the directing staff. We were the teachers. I was teaching there in that college as a colonel. And we are called the directing staff. And we are having this discussion about what does it really mean to us, people in uniform, and about what does it mean to use of force itself in strategic affairs, conventional war, and so on. And there was this, nearly everybody, actually, I found that I kept quiet, and I was singularly perplexed to know that most of the people thought, well, nothing much will change. And so at some point, actually, I made my interjection, and it was countered immediately by the senior officer who had come. And I then sort of got into a very unlike the tradition of the staff college, gone to a one-to-one argument with him. The commandant intervened and nearly told me to shut up. He didn't use those words, but he said, just keep quiet. I mean, that was it. So I was a little, let's say, later after that incident took place, I mean, I got a message from, soon after the incident, I got a message that, why don't you come and have a drink with me, from the senior officer. So I went and had a drink with him. I think it was next day. And we argued the same, he argued the same, and we left it that we'll agree to disagree. But I couldn't agree with myself, and therefore I started looking at this issue. And I was very fond of that. They've got a lovely library there in Staff College. It's one of the best libraries, service libraries in the world. I just spent a lot of time whenever I could. So I started now looking at this. And I really don't know what to do. How do I go about it? I mean, after all, I'm a serving colonel. I've, finished my command and so on. Then I thought, let me take some study leave and study this subject. And I was in this process of, thinking about the study leave when one day I was sitting at the bar of the Wellington Gymkhana, and a person walked in. There normally, because it's cold everywhere, everybody wears a tie. It's pretty formal and so on. And he came and sat next to me, and they introduced himself, and he said he's Professor so-and-so from the Madras University. And they give us students get MSc degrees from the Madras University. So he had come there, he makes a couple of visits. So I said, nice. Then I had a conversation with him, and I told him that I want to do a PhD, but I have not done my MPhil. So he said, no, you are a teacher of the university, because you're teaching in this college. This institution is recognized by the college, so you're considered to be a teacher. If you're a teacher at the university, you don't have to do MPhil to do PhD. That's how I did my PhD. And then, of course, it took me 10 years to do my PhD because, I went off, my study leave finished. I traveled. For 2 years, I traveled. I went to the United States and I went all over. I worked on a project by the Department of Atomic Energy and the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. And I traveled, but I had my thesis was in my head, but it was not very much on paper except for the notes and, a lot of references. And then suddenly, 2 years got over and I was posted as a brigadier to North Kashmir. I was commanding the Hajipir Brigade. And that was, what is called, we were the guys who went, and suddenly 2001 occurred, and then Parakram took place, and we were mobilized. And I used to tell my BM that according to my thesis, we are not supposed to have this sort of war between two nuclear powers. So if the war happens, but I was planning for it, if the war happens, I used to say, that means the first casualty will, as far as I'm concerned, will be my thesis, because according to my thesis, this war cannot take place. And my thesis so far is held. I mean, from the time I've actually written it, in the sense that it's been more than 20 years since all that have started. And it is generally held. So we continue to have war. Forms of war have changed. And political leaders were past their rhetoric always, they have been very cautious because they know that this guy will bring the end to themselves and the whole nation and the whole world. If this thing, so they know it. I mean, we don't have to doubt it. They might threaten and all that, make noise and try to frighten and so on. So you have two worlds here. The world is, one world is the world of deterrence where you try to frighten the other. Therefore, you develop a whole lot of, type of weaponry and the rest of it, and then advertise it and tell him that, boss, this is what I'm going to do to you, what I can do to you. So you have the world of deterrence. But the second world is actually the world in which you're fighting to, you're planning to fight a conventional war under this nuclear shadow, but you simply do not know as to how can the intensity of this conventional war not slip into the nuclear domain. When I say slip, it is not as much as use of nuclear weapons straight away, as much that nuclear weapons will get alerted on both sides. And if nuclear weapons get alerted on both sides, then the ball game is completely different. Because at that point in time, one must assume that deep distrust, deep sense of enmity would be prevailing, not only among leaders, but even in the emotional, let's say, sphere of the population. But again, depends upon whether the country, Pakistan, can threaten us by just saying that we have alerted our nuclear weapons. And they'll probably show us some signs that they have alerted their nuclear weapons. And it will be, there's no question of India not doing the same. I mean, they can't do, and they can't even conceal it from the public. So you can imagine the type of chaos that it can be. And in this sort of crisis, if somebody starts a rumor that within 2 hours, New Delhi is going to be bombed, then you know what will happen. All the Delhiites will start moving out of Delhi, and the entire roads will be blocked, and there'll be complete mayhem. So you can fight a war without fighting it, because you can fight it psychologically. And that is what the people are doing now. And that we must understand that is what technology has made feasible. But that doesn't mean that you can still go and capture territory. So I must make a difference here. If you want to capture territory, either you have to get the opposite side to tell you, I give up, you please keep territory which you have captured. I'm not going to do anything about it. You take. Okay, that's one point. That means he has capitulated. Now, no nation is going to capitulate without actually giving a fight, especially as territory is concerned. And definitely not India. India is highly territorial, and because of our dispute, that's not going to happen. So if anybody wants to come and take land from us, I'm afraid that they'll have to send in people who not only will destroy us and will do a lot of damage, but they'll have to sit there and defend it against the Indians. And that, I'm afraid, is outside the capability of most nations in the world. I can assure you. So you can threaten war, but you can't apply the force, and you can still try to affect psychologically. This is what nuclear weapons has done, that it can directly influence the minds of the decision maker on the other side by just threatening nuclear, because that is the nature of the weapon itself. The scope of its destruction conveys serious threat to existence of the nation and others also. So it cannot be ignored. Of course, you can play ignorance and so on. Those are games which will be played. And so a lot of theories have actually come about at how we can actually use these nuclear weapons without using them, and how we can threaten, go by, they have had many steps on which you can climb. Those will never survive reality. Reality, you can't actually, because you simply do not know what is exactly happening on the other side. He might be just reacting to you, or you might be just reacting to him, but he doesn't know who's going to be the first guy to actually start the ball rolling. He doesn't know. He's got doubt in his mind. So any movement that he makes, and all the intelligence which will be pouring into that national command or control room or whatever you want to call it, political leaders will be under such severe strain that they will not understand what the hell is happening, because nuclear weapons are involved. They have to be cool people. So they have not ventured there, where actually they've gone into a situation where there is a nuclear alert, and people have been told to actually be careful, because one of the things when nuclear alert takes place of a particular disease is that their leadership will have to go underground and protect themselves. America sends them up in the air in a couple of jet planes, keep them in the air. They're safest there. We also probably would have plans like that. So the point is like this. The point that we would be in a situation where when leadership under such grave pressure, their decision-making capacity would also severely be affected. And therefore, the type of deterrence steps taken to fight a nuclear war, how about using force conventionally first and then graduating to nuclear weapons through tactical nuclear weapons or larger nuclear weapons, have had remained in the books of the academics, and of course the strategists also believed in them, but it has never been tested. It should not be tested because there's no question it'll never pass the test of reality. It'll put the world into grave danger. So these are things used to actually frighten and deter the other, that we can do all this, and therefore we show we got a lot of weapons and so on. So the point is that we are now in a situation where nuclear weapons cannot be used, but wars still will be fought because communities are in a state of protracted struggle. When struggle is continuous and the grievances cannot be borne by one or both the sides, then the human this thing is to go into violence. The point now is, especially among the technologically advanced powers, they have found a lot of means of how this violence can be inflicted. And those means are very low in the sense that it cannot capture territory by itself. You can only do it by actually influencing the minds of the other leadership on the other side. Because or you can actually capture that mind purely by actually buying them up. Today, that's what China has been doing, and that's what debt diplomacy is about. They don't inflict any violence. They just use the instrument of force of the economics and weaponize it to capture territory. Because what do? They buy up the leadership, and therefore they get everything for themselves. I mean, they just then call the shots. They've done this all over so many islands in the Pacific itself. I mean, and even in the Indian Ocean, that's been a constant endeavor. So the question is that now, since that does not really fall in the definition of war itself, those means have now gained prominence. That doesn't mean that violence has gone away. Violence is being inflicted on the people in different ways. I think we have to understand this difference. So it is not physical. Violence doesn't have to be physical. Violence can also be mental. What is changing in warfare is this shift from the physical to the mental.
So, sir, in fact, in the book, you have also mentioned about the stability instability paradox, which you also touched upon a little bit. I just want to know, for example, in South Asian context, where we have the nuclear China and the nuclear Pakistan, and as you were mentioning about it, the nuclear weapons is more of a political weapon to make sure that the other people knows that we have to engage in a limited war. So, what are India's nuclear capabilities? Because we know that Pakistan has about the same, if not more, warheads compared to India. But though their deadliest missile is just 2,750, but looking at China, it's 14,550, which is the Dongfeng 41. So we know both the countries know that India won't be engaging in the first we won't be engaging in the first strike. So how does that sense up in the South Asian region?
See, India's way of looking at nuclear weapons actually, in many ways, mirrors what China's stated nuclear doctrine is, in the sense that both the countries believe that nuclear weapons cannot be used for useful political purposes. They are primarily political weapons. They can be used in the realm of politics, to play politics, but they cannot be used physically. So there's a difference between, they cannot be used for military purposes. Both countries believe in that. That's the basic belief. And therefore, neither China nor India, and India in particular, don't believe that the numbers really make all the difference. Our numbers, we believe, as long as we have the ability to survive a first strike and strike back, then that is sufficient to make sure that deterrence is maintained. So even if we do any calculation, you will never know how many weapons India has got, and don't believe fully what is the social media or what public works. Those are top secret, held by countries. These are estimates made in universities and so on by people who actually have a lot of expertise in the field, and they might be well correct, but I would say that they are not the official source. So we must take it with a pinch of salt, and they always come within a range of weapons. So India believes that as long as it's, and therefore our ultimate belief is that as long as we have SSBN, submarines, which is the most difficult for any nation to actually attack, as long as we have a certain number of SSBNs, we would have the capability to react, even if the hinterland is actually destroyed or gravely damaged. That's our belief. And we also believe that nothing can be said for sure. So therefore, we have invested a lot in both long-range missiles and also in terms of air power. So we have it on 3 legs, so that none of those, even if one leg is lost, the other leg can do what it has to do. And that's purely because of survivability. But all this is nonsensical in many ways, because if any country attacks India, let's say with 100 weapons, and 100 weapons will not destroy all our weapons. They require much more, because if you see the way the calculation of the nuclear weapons on a target is done, and it's all there in the public domain, people have written about it. It's quite a crazy way. They will require, to destroy 100 weapons, you'll probably require at least in some calculation about 600 to 800 weapons. So, so all these things about being able to destroy the other, it's all meant for deterrence. It's not possible. And as I told you, if about 100 weapons is used on India, then the rest of the world will finally actually have to face a threat because of the climate change problem. And India is not a small country, so the soot and the smoke which will be sent up will block the sun. It will spread around the world. Agriculture and water, etc. will be. So all this is just. So surely the guy who's using 100 weapons on us will have to think about his own existence later. So it doesn't make any sense. So the point is, therefore, we don't have to have. We have to have weapons which will survive, and I think that is what drives India's nuclear weapons. Not because Pakistan has so and so, China has so and so, nothing else. These are not number counting; it's not applicable. They're only meant to actually frighten people who do not know.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, how different countries have formed the doctrines? If you could just tell a little bit about that. But before that, so there's this one thing, as you're mentioning about that, the restraint that the countries need to have, and the deterrence theory. But all of these are in pen and paper, right? But can we have an actual control when a war actually happen, or is there still this thin line that all is in pen and paper, but the control and the entire control is not possible in the deterrence theory?
Yeah, actually, that's, it's there in my book. And actually, the person who actually spoke about it and has written it down is Clausewitz on war, where his theory of escalation is where actually this comes about. And the theory is like this, that the exchange of violence between communities, between nations, has actually got three legs which interact with each other, or three forces. They're sources of power, or sources of emotional feelings, you can say. One is actually how, at that point, is this sense of hostility between both these communities and nations. What is the, how is the general population itself linked to the fact that we want to destroy these guys? I mean, you can reach a situation in conflict where this happens. So this is one leg which influences escalation. The second leg actually which influences is political rationality, which means the guys in charge know that we can't allow this out of control, because if we don't keep it in control, we will be in trouble. Okay, that's what this political leaders are supposed to do. So the other leg is political rationality. The third leg, which is the one which cannot be controlled by anybody, is what Clausewitz described as friction and the fog of war. And what it means actually is that so much of uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity is there when military forces are set in motion, that it is very difficult for any side to understand and try to preempt or do anything, because they simply cannot get into the heads of the decision makers what they are thinking at the moment. Maybe you'll be there, but 25 years from now, you'll come to know that scientists have discovered a way to do that they can get into, let's say the Americans can get into Xi Jinping when he's in a crisis and make him take a decision. So that's technologically what now the Americans themselves are talking about. But the fact is that you can actually, so fog of war is something which cannot be wished away, because this is the nature of warfare itself. That warfare is not about you understanding exactly what that guy is trying to do, or he understanding what he's trying to do, what you're planning to do, how you are planning to do it is impossible. The only thing you can assess based on intelligence reports and all sort of stuff which you try to gain. But the fact remains that during that time, there is a complete uncertainty. And therefore, this fog, which you call the fog of war, creates friction. And it makes anything, any movement and so on, that much more difficult. He actually compared friction in war to actually walking in the water. Very difficult to walk in the water, and especially if you're on the sea, because of the resistance provided by the water itself. And this cannot go away, although technologists are now saying that we can see this battlefield very clearly, we can see everything, we can see a golf ball there, and we know everything and whatnot. I mean, this happened much before the Americans went to Afghanistan. But how is it then that if they have seen everybody and they know everything, and whatever it is, they go and kill so many innocent people all the time? How does that happen? How do you actually hit wedding parties and family get-togethers and so on, even when actually, because the intelligence might be wrong and somebody made a wrong assessment? So the human being cannot be perfect. The problem with the people who are actually doing the theory is that they consider that this will be practiced by rational, cool-headed human beings, mature guys sitting and actually having a lot of time to think. I'm afraid there is nothing of the sort at that time. The leader himself will be under such tremendous mental pressure, and all his people advised will be the same. They will not be their normal selves. Do not expect. This is exactly, I'm not saying this is what Clausewitz described as friction, but this is actually what is friction, because this sort of thing has come about later. So the point is, friction cannot be done away with. Now, if you imagine a magnet, and this is a triangle, that means on top of the triangle is the hostility between the communities. Right side of the base is actually the political rationale, and other one is fog of war. If you draw the triangle and you suspend a magnet in between, and that is the escalation factor, then depending upon the stronger force, the escalation will move to that side. So far, what has happened between nuclear powers, political rationale has always kept escalation towards it. Fog of war has not been this thing because not much of war. The only war which we have fought is the type of skirmishes which we are having, which, that's the type in which we have fought. And of course, hostility is always the degree of emotional hostility is always a factor in this political rationale. So the point is that if nobody can take a guarantee, so it is a risk, but that risk now comes with not about the issue at hand. It's putting humanity at stake if we use nuclear weapons. So nobody can possibly argue that if we use only one nuclear weapon, the war will stop, because if that guy uses in reply one more, and then you use one more, or he uses 10 more in the first reply itself, how do you know? You don't know. You simply don't know. So this idea that actually we can play ping pong with nuclear weapons and toss it against each other, it will never pass the test of reality. It cannot. And it is better not even test it.
Yeah. In fact, this was one of the questions that I had, that a lot of experts have believed that there can be a limited nuclear war between nations. And you just said that it's completely discredited, because then it becomes again a battleground of one use, the other come back from there.
No, but the point is that if you don't have a theory of limited nuclear war, how do you justify having a first use theory? You can't justify it without actually believing in limited nuclear war. The thing about if you want to have no first use, then you can't believe in limited nuclear war. The problem with these guys who think only about the first strike, who believe in the first strike, is this, that they have to keep it alive. They have to believe in limited nuclear war, which is the most dangerous thing to undertake.
Yeah. So coming a little bit to US perspective, and I think this is the second last question I have. So in your view, what impact would it be have a doctrinal shift regarding the role of nuclear weapons by the United States, have a non-proliferation and disarmament efforts? And do you think some states and commentators have said this? And I think in Syria as well, this happened, that the sheer chance of a terrorist group or non-state actor getting holds of chemical weapons itself made the entire world rush to save those the chemical weapons. So does it have also a little problematic for especially countries who have a lot of problems with non-state actors, and if they have procured nuclear weapons, it might fall in the hands of non-state actors? And what about the rogue actors as well?
Yeah, actually, so this is a question which India has answered pretty well, in the sense that India says that we have a no first use for weapons of mass destruction, right? That's what it is. Now, since weapons of mass destruction can come not only in the form of nuclear weapons, it can also come in the form of biological and chemical weapons. India has a clause in its nuclear doctrine which says that anybody who uses biological and chemical weapons, I mean, I'm not nuclear, definitely, chemical weapons, India retains the options to retaliate with nuclear weapons, which means it is not a commitment that we will retaliate. Every time somebody makes a chemical attack in some small place, India is not going to use nuclear weapons to do that. The option is left to depending upon the scale of the attack. And therefore, it is not no first use by any chance, although only because we have said this in our doctrine. See, the thing is, it is called, it's been commitment trap. The commitment trap is, if you say you will use nuclear weapons when chemical weapons are used, that guy will use, let's say, very small amount of nuclear weapons. Will you still retaliate with nuclear weapons? It doesn't make any sense. So this is what the nations have actually kept away from. But there is another catch here. See, the point is that when it comes to limited nuclear war, one of the things which has to be kept alive for this to prevail, and which is called extended deterrence. Because without the concept of limited nuclear war, you cannot keep extended deterrence alive, which means America cannot give nuclear coverage, in the sense that they say that if anybody attacks Japan with nuclear weapons, we will attack back, we'll use our nuclear weapons on them. And that's the sort of treaty relationship which they have. So is with South Korea and so on. So this is called extended deterrence. Now, if you want to keep this alive, without a limited nuclear war, you can't keep this alive without belief in limited nuclear war. You understand? Because the fact is that it believes that that country which you are providing the deterrence to, let's say to Japan, hopes that if it finds out that China is going to attack Japan, then America will use its nuclear weapons to make sure that that attack is at least weakened. That means America will use nuclear weapons first. This is what provides the psychological protection to Japan. If it is to be believed that Chinese use nuclear weapons on Japan, actually, then also a retaliation definitely can come, but it would not be in the first strike mode. The first strike mode allows you, based on this thing, to also extend deterrence to the others. If you didn't have first strike, how do you give deterrence to the other guy? So this is a problem which needs to be resolved. But I think there is a great opportunity here, although the present condition of geopolitics may not allow it, and we might think it's too far-fetched. But I think at least people who think on this matter should now start thinking of actually getting the United States to adopt a no first use policy. And let me tell you that Obama came very close to it, but the military element in his administration did not support it, because the military logic can never be. The military logic is that how the heck can you allow anybody to hit you first? That's military logic. Okay? That's inviolable. If I have a chance to hit another guy first, I would prefer that, because it will cause less damage to me later. That's logic, but the political logic is completely different. So wherever countries where the military has, let's say, greater say decision making on these matters, you find that they will find it difficult to give up the first use policy and go to no first use. But I think now there is a case, and that is that Russia will probably, in fact, Russia also soon after the breakup went into a no first use policy for a little while before they came back. And what can possibly happen? I think there is space here in global geopolitics. Fundamentally, the relations have to improve before all this takes place. It cannot be in the midst when you're fighting on all other things, threatening war with each other, and then you want to have these sort of things. It won't happen. But the fact that the thinking is going on, because the Americans and the Chinese, it is for the Americans to change their mind. Chinese are already there. India is already there, right? So the fact is that maybe you will be able to convince that what it does, don't forget, what nuclear no first use does is it minimizes the level of danger. And danger in the sense that if there is a crisis, then these people know they have to quickly try and defuse it. They can't escalate it. But nuclear limited war theory says that you can escalate it. Now the theory says that, and that's another point, you can escalate the conventional war to such an extent that you can achieve political objectives which you want. But that's what I say in my book. That the problem is that the scale and scope of political objectives which can be used by force, which can be achieved by force, has shrunk. You can hurt, you can destroy, but remember, you can only capture mines and territory. Mines, you can do it now directly. Territory, you require force. You require people to go there, live there, dig there. And that's something which capability most nations don't have, at least against us.
Yeah. So a small follow-up on that, as you're talking about the doctrine, and this comes to my mind that And a doctrine like, for example, non-proliferation, or let's talk about a theory like non-proliferation theory for a moment to see from US perspective that some states might feel insecure from neighboring states, and the nuclear weapons they won't be using for sure, but they might have it for their own safety that the other countries might not attack, but to not help other countries acquire nuclear weapons is little advantageous for US perspective, right?
See, actually, it's a very discriminatory treaty, and that's why India has refused to actually join it, because it makes it sort of uh, freezes the nuclear haves and leave everybody else outside. I mean, only guys who have nuclear weapons on a particular date can keep nuclear weapons, and we have completely disagreed with that. But we also believe that we should not encourage or we should discourage people to have nuclear weapons. In India, we did not go nuclear. It went nuclear after a long struggle with itself because of its belief in other ways of actually conducting the affairs of the state. So the point is that we are a very reluctant nuclear power. It is because of fact, but both China and China aided Pakistan in developing their nuclear weapons. We had no choice. So the point is that we are still saying, we still believe that there should be universal disarmament. But we know all that is not practical. What is practical, we should now say, is no first use, which China and India already has. But it is no guarantor for war not becoming nuclear, but at least it imposes caution because it is based on a belief system which believes that you should give survival and safety more priority than the ability to actually kill people. That is a fundamental belief.
Yeah. So my final question is, how do you see the future, especially the flashpoints in South Asia? And, uh, and the next part is complete disarmament possible in this age?
Let me take the second part first. The complete disarmament looks utopian at the moment. I mean, let's forget it at this point in time. But I think we should keep talking about it, keep it alive in the debates, because there is now more and more reason, and especially because of the climate change issue. Previously, what has happened to the climate change thing is, although the scientific, let's say, research indicates that this was not there earlier. Okay, it only came about in the 1980s when actually American scientists, then the American scientists joined up with the USSR scientists to actually do the study. But these nations with a nuclear past find it very highly inconvenient, because then it questions the very reason for having nuclear weapons. So they have suppressed it. They have said that it is not the case and so on. And they've just sort of, it is not there in much of the debate. In fact, we have in Takshashila a book which is coming out on this issue, in which we actually say that we should have a global no first use treaty. And that book would probably come out in a couple of months. So that is the last question. And what was your question earlier to that?
How do you see the future of, especially in flashpoints like in South Asia?
Right. Okay. Right. So the fact is that as far as the big guys in South Asia are concerned, who are nuclear powers, which involves the three triangular nations, I am hopeful that political rationality and wisdom will prevail, and their own survival instinct will actually push in, that nobody will take the type of risk that it might risk a nuclear war. I don't think there is anything which at stake between the countries which demands a risk of nuclear war. I don't see that happening in the sea. So the type of wars which are going to be fought in our subcontinent will obviously involve China, Pakistan against India as the main frame. The rest will all be between, India has got many neighbors, so I don't see any warlike situation coming about with any other small states. We might have certain situations because of cross-border infiltration with Myanmar or Bangladesh or Pakistan, and between the smaller ones, I don't see much. The borders will have, the main thing with those borders actually, as far as security is concerned, is to how do you actually make it, how do you allow legal movement to take place? The problem now is we need to actually unlock our borders so that that free movement in South Asia takes place. South Asia becomes one economic unit. But how do you balance that with the security needs which are now there because of the various politics in the subcontinent? So this is a challenge for India. So India will have to take the load and the lead in that. And the fact remains, therefore, that the world will always show that South Asia is a nuclear flashpoint. And it is a theory which the Pakistanis like to propagate because it suits them. It suits them to call the world's attention to the dispute between Pakistan and India and keep it alive in the international forum. This is, again, it's a psychological game. It hardly makes any difference to India except to say that India did this and replied to this and the Pakistani said this and so on. It doesn't really make any difference. So I think war between India and Pakistan will change in its form. War will continue. War will continue. War is actually permanent now. It looks like, because we hardly have high commissioners in each other's territory. The fact remains, therefore, we will try to do harm to them. They will try to do harm to them, and each one will have a reason as why they're doing harm, and that will continue. But I don't see it breaking up into a major war of any consequence. And even if, let's say, the Chinese actually attack us in the northern Himalayas, the fact that the Pakistanis might actually try to tie up our forces on the Western Front is always a part of Indian calculations. It's not something which is a situation which is new. And it is unlikely that you can expect that there will be two big wars to fight by India simultaneously. But the types of war might be different. It might put a lot of pressure on our systems because we might have to, what do you call, say, these two joining up and acting in concert is now actually, it is increased at the lower levels of conflict. At levels where actually you can deny you use cyberspace or do something in space itself. But as you keep coming to the higher level of conflict where force has to be actually applied, then the ball game is different. Then only that much force can be possibly applied. And we have already reacted, and we took the Kailash range when actually the Chinese came in various other parts of Ladakh, and that finally is a process which is, of course, the Chinese have halted all withdrawal, but that is just like what the Chinese do, and I don't know why we withdrew only from that place and not left the other places out for another time. We have enough experience with the Chinese. We don't trust them. They are so good in deception and perfidy. We don't seem to learn our lessons, but that's another story.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir, for that answer. And thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and being on the show. And for all those viewers listening to this, I'll put a link for your book, The Strategic Draft, Indian-Pakistan Under Nuclear Shadow. It's available on Amazon. I'll put a link to the book so that if anyone is interested, can go and buy the book. Thank you so much again, sir, for taking your time and being on the show.
Thank you, Ratnadeep. Always a pleasure. Stay safe, be careful.